Hello and welcome to State of Minnesota Nonprofits. This is a conversation we've been having now for the past year here at the Minneapolis Foundation to educate our fund holders and the public, but especially our fund holders who generously invest in our nonprofit community and sector here in the state. My name is Tom Weber. This series debuted last January with the same kind of webinar you're watching here today, and we find ourselves in another critical moment for nonprofits and for the state of Minnesota. You can find all the videos we've done over the past year on the Minneapolis Foundation's YouTube page, so feel free to look that up. The goal here today is to reset and to give you an understanding of Minnesota's nonprofit ecosystem in this moment and how philanthropy is working to help nonprofits in an uncertain world. And to do that, we are welcoming back the guests from last year's, we're getting the band back together here. Nonoko Sato is Executive Director of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, which is the largest state association for nonprofits in the country, and also Nonoko was named to the board of the National Council of Nonprofits this week, so welcome and congrats.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Amy Pfarr is a Philanthropic Advisor here at the Minneapolis Foundation. Amy's been learning and tracking in the same way that Nonoko has about the nonprofit sector, because our fund holders, people who hold donor advised funds here, are always reaching out to get a little advice and some help. So thank you for being here, Amy.
Thank you, Tom.
And as always, we have a function on this webinar to ask questions. So we won't get to all of them, but we will absolutely try to get to as many as we can. So you can even start entering some of those questions now. So how you holding up?
Broad question.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's really tough. I think that a lot of the nonprofits, especially those that are on the ground and those that provide community-based support, are really feeling the impacts of the increased ICE raids right now. But instead of starting out with a negative, what I would say is I think I am really heartened by the community response and the folks who are really interested in supporting these nonprofits on the ground who are doing really incredible work right now. So I still see hope in that, and it's tough, but we're built for this, and I know Minnesota's going to get through it together.
Amy?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because it speaks to the grace and humanity that we have to have for each other right now in this moment. So I think I'm personally holding a lot of the emotions and feelings that I hear our fund holders are holding, right? Being disheartened, being surprised, being in disbelief that this can happen in our community, and yet taking that collective moment for that collective deep breath and acknowledging those feelings as we process the moment, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. And just for those watching, we actually set this up, we scheduled this before this increased presence, federal agents, ICE agents in the Twin Cities, but really throughout Minnesota as well. So just from timing perspective, this wasn't a show created because of it, but in lieu of it, or I should say because of it. How are you seeing the nonprofits you work with, Nonoko? I mean, how is their work different? What is happening differently for a lot of these organizations, especially really, and even in these past 2-3 weeks?
Honestly, I don't know if I would choose the word different, because I think a lot of nonprofits have the expertise and the community trust that they have always been building to meet the needs of these moments like today. Mm-hmm. I think one of the challenges, though, would be to make sure that not only are the community being supported, but also the people who are working in these organizations. We are still businesses, we are still employers, and I think that there's always has to be a consideration about what's unfolding in our world, how we respond in this moment is also impacting the people that we need in order for us to be able to run the organization. So, and with that, I think it's always shifting. I think when nonprofits see, especially on the ground nonprofits, when they see a need, they want to be able to address it. And so, they're thinking about ways to raise the revenue and the support and the infrastructure to be able to meet those kind of needs that are constantly evolving. So it's less about being different, but it's more around how are nonprofits working together, how are they communicating with each other, how are they mobilizing, organizing, There's a lot more of that I think I'm seeing than, let's say, in 2020 when, you know, the racial uprising was happening here in Minneapolis.
Yeah. You know, we've seen, especially on social media, you see a lot of private businesses, restaurants,
Yes.
stores, you know, private businesses are announcing that they're closing or reduced hours because they're looking out for the safety of their workers. Are we seeing that in the nonprofit world as well, just anecdotally? Are people closing, or is it maybe work from home? I mean, it seems like the same kinds of conversations will be happening
Absolutely,
in
yeah.
nonprofit world.
I think many nonprofit organizations feel like they don't necessarily have a choice to close. But what I would say is that I'm seeing a lot of nonprofits who understand the the specific attacks, let's say, against the Somali community and our Hmong community, the refugee communities, and the folks who identify as that in the nonprofit sector. How are we best supporting them and making sure that they have an opportunity to work from home? I think in a lot of ways, though, I see more nonprofit people wanting to be on the ground and being in community. And so perhaps maybe it's our responsibility as employers to be like, you also need to take a break. You know, that whole airplane rule of you have to take care of yourself before you take care of community.
Right.
I think that really, really applies here. But I haven't necessarily seen any retreats from the nonprofit organizations who are really determined to make sure that community can get through this moment.
Amy, as Nonoko was talking, it occurs to me, like, one of your jobs, right? We have these folks here at the foundation who hold these donor advice funds, these fund holders, and so part of your job is to field calls or emails from them. And it would seem to me like in moments like this, you may be getting more. Like, what can I do to help? Is the call volume up, just anecdotally, here at the foundation?
Certainly, people are reaching out. They're hearing the headlines, seeing what's happening in their neighborhoods, on their streets, and just reaching out to say, how can I use my giving as the antidote, as the response to all of those feelings that I'm having about this?
You know, I've been reflecting on the last month or so. In late November, early December, we had a government shutdown, and there was a big worry that SNAP benefits, food assistance benefits would be cut off, and they actually were for a little bit. There was some confusion there for a few days as well. And at that moment, there was a lot of focus on food banks, food shelves, right? They were running out of food. People suddenly needed those services. And the dynamic has changed now with the presence. It doesn't mean that you should stop supporting food shelves, that they are still very much in need. But now we've seen this shift to, there are people in our community who don't feel safe leaving. And so they can't get to a food shelf. We have to figure out how to literally directly deliver food to them. And it does seem to me, and some food shelves are doing that, but there are other nonprofits that maybe this isn't their normal business model, but are doing that. And there are these shifts in the kinds of work that's happening too. What do you
absolutely. So, I mean, I know we're going to get into this a little bit, but the demands for services are surging, and we knew that, whether that's because people can't go to grocery stores or they don't feel safe. And the money that is needed to run those programs have been a little bit stagnant even before all this has been happening. And so, you know, when we're talking to food shelf organizations, for example, a couple things. One is like there's also like these established nonprofit organizations, but there are also like mutual aid programs, school, PTOs,
churches.
Doing a drive, churches, those are all nonprofits as well. So a lot of folks are stepping in, especially to meet the, you know, culturally specific needs of certain communities that might be fearing for their safety in terms of going out. I think in terms of the fund holders for Minneapolis Foundation, like, yes, to your point, continue supporting the food shelves. I think what they need right now are their ability to be able to be nimble, because every entity is thinking about how to best support their community in a different way. So for some people, it might be like, we need to have a bus right now, fill it all with food and get out there. For others, it might be, we need to be in communication with people on the ground with these mutual aid, you know, organizations, and sending them the food so that they can distribute accordingly. So I think that there's a flexibility that is really needed, I think, in nonprofits who are on the ground, so that they can just be, because everything is changing minute by minute. Things that were just really important last week may not necessarily be as important today. So that flexibility, I think, is really important right now.
Just on that last note, I've even seen a slight shift now. There's still a focus on getting people food in their homes, but now rent is coming due.
Yeah.
So now where are the rental assistance programs, or what kind of mutual aid can happen there?
Right.
Amy, when we talk about that, what Nonoko was talking about, and this is not new, especially for our foundations, but as you know, there are foundations and funders that sometimes are a bit stringent, and you could only use this money for certain things, and I think this reiterates the point of unrestricted dollars, the
Yes.
general operations.
Yep, general operating gives those nonprofits who are continually pivoting that flexibility that they need to respond and use the dollars where they need it most. And then I think, to speaking to Nonoko's point of what the nonprofits are doing now might differ next week or what they did last week, that's really too where folks can rely on their philanthropic advisor to kind of understand what is the greatest need in this moment, based on what we're hearing from all of the nonprofits that we're working with.
So it's okay to keep emailing you,
Yes.
to keep calling you?
Yes.
How is it different than it was last week?
Exactly. Reach out to your philanthropic advisor and utilize, right, the information, the pulse that we have on community by virtue of all of the work we're doing with nonprofits and the relationships that we have with people like Nonoko. That is our job, is to help kind of unpack how and where you can have impact in community and what that looks like and how can it be aligned into their own values.
And for those who maybe aren't fund holders who are watching this, I mean, at least here at the Minneapolis Foundation, we've prepared lists. Like, we actually can name organizations. Have you thought about this organization, and have you thought about that organization? I know that's a lot of work your team's been doing.
Exactly, because folks are seeing the headlines and they're feeling the feels, right? And then understanding and wanting to understand, how can I respond? How can I make a difference? And that's really where we're creating these kind of curated lists of anything, using today's example of ICE insurgents and presence. It's anything from legal advice and legal resources to food to families who are afraid to leave their homes. So recognizing that there's a lot of different ways to help, and that's where those curated lists can come into play and help.
Do you want to add anything to that, or?
I do, actually. So I think a couple things. One, about like the unrestricted dollars or general operating dollars. That is, I do think, the release of those restrictions during the early years of COVID and after the murder of George Floyd really did allow nonprofits to be nimble and really get us through those moments. So I would argue that it continues to be the same. And I think nonprofits were also struggling in that some funders have reverted back to being more program specific, or like just having more restrictions. It's not like the needs haven't necessarily changed. Second thing too is when there is a crisis in our community, I totally understand. I feel the same way. There's a gut reaction to want to help and to direct support to those organizations that are in most need of whatever support that you're able to give. But the reality of the situation is that all nonprofit organizations are impacted in so many different ways. And so right now it could be a food shelf organization, but then on the other hand, arts organizations are also struggling right now because people aren't going out and seeing theater shows, for example, right? It might be housing tomorrow, but it could also be just accessing like good farming, making sure like there are farmers and our agriculture infrastructure is all set up. All those things are going to be impacting Minnesotans as a whole. And so I think my caution is yes, people have a tendency to run and be give me the organizations that are working on really good immigration rights organizations. Yes, and please don't forget about the rest of the nonprofits who are also dealing with a lot of struggles right now as well.
Yeah, it's an important point. I think we talk about it as being a partner that adds to your giving portfolio and not takes away. So, individuals have their core organizations that they have supported year after year. Continue that. Don't take away, don't redistribute the dollars, but add to your giving portfolio when you're seeing headlines that you want to respond to. So to your point is recognizing that nonprofits across the board are in need of support, and so being a partner that adds to and not takes away from is important.
How do our fund holders, or just when you talk about that, there is always this, the pie's not big enough, or there's not enough to go around, and I think we can actually dispel that there are a lot of resources in the world. I mean, are people open to that when you say that? I mean, certainly the nonprofits will be, but just regular people, fund holders, to say, maybe you've been used to giving $500 a year to whatever orgs you want. maybe you really should start thinking about more. Are they receptive to that?
Yeah, receptive to that, and especially in the here and now, I would say 40% of our fund holders gave more in 2025, granted out more in 2025 than they did in 2024. I think that is an amazing infusion into community. I think it's in part because some of the way in which we're advising and having conversations with them, right? We're pointing to the fact that your donor advised fund isn't your typical retirement account that you want to see grow and grow and grow. It is designated dollars for charitable purposes. And so getting those dollars out in the door into community is really key right now in this moment. We have a Give Advise campaign that talks about connecting to community needs, and one of the Give Advise campaign headlines is getting off your assets. It's funny, it's witty, but it is so true. In this here and now, in this moment, getting off your assets in a significant way is really, truly an important way and opportunity to respond, again, with dollars in your DAF that have already been designated for charitable purposes.
I think one of the things I've learned even just from watching my colleagues here do that campaign is this: we have all these accounts in our life, our savings account, a checking account, a college account, and we always want those to go up because we want to feel secure. And this is the one account in your life where the goal should be go to zero.
Yeah.
Because that means the tax benefit has already been received. The money is already set aside for charitable, so you might as well do it.
Yep, we say in this fund, down is up.
Down is up.
Yeah.
This is a program we're calling State of Minnesota Nonprofits, which is actually the title. It's our plagiarism with the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. You have your own report, which is called that, and so we've been utilizing that name to try to expound in the last year about how Minnesota nonprofits are meeting the moment or seeing the moment. And you also do an annual report. You do a survey. You've done a more recent survey. It does not include the last 3 weeks, but I feel like probably the themes, regardless, are still the same. So just update us on how even there's been change, or maybe not change, from this most recent report, this most recent survey, and the previous ones.
Yeah, so just a quick background is that we launched the current condition survey in March of 2020, right when the pandemic happened, or started, and just to get a pulse check on how nonprofits are doing. And we quickly realized that doing a more regular survey is really helpful for us in understanding, regardless of what is happening in the world around us, how nonprofits are faring, and to be able to share that with donors and elected officials. We really found value in that. We did 2 last year simply because we realized everything was moving quickly. So we did one in the fall, one in the spring, one in the fall. Not much has necessarily changed, except for the fact that maybe the word uncertainty wasn't as prevalent in the second survey. Whereas especially early on in 2025, people were like, I don't even know what is happening and what am I supposed to pay attention to. I think it's also important for folks to understand that the issues that have been impacting nonprofit sector was happening even before the election in 2024. Challenges around rise in demands for services, challenges in retaining and attracting the right level of staff, making sure that they're paid and supported and have the benefits that they need. For us to be able to fight against this idea that nonprofits can be, domestic terrorist organization and suddenly find ourselves with a tax-exempt status revoked. All those things were already happening. So I think, it's not like, we were in this very happy place and, doing good work, and then suddenly everything hits like a hurricane. It was still really, really bad, and it just got worse. It's essentially what I would say about it. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned a little bit about the uncertainty piece. I think the current conditions report in 2025 really emphasized the challenges around the overwhelming information and actions that was happening at the federal level, and for nonprofits to really understand how that might impact them, right? And so things around, calling DEI illegal. And most of us are sitting here and we're like, we don't even know what that means. Yeah. It's like, well, you can't discriminate against people based on race, for example. Well, we couldn't do that anyway. That was already illegal. Mm-hmm. So what is actually illegal? And so I think a lot of nonprofits who were trying to understand the legalities of it were seeking out lawyers to just even ask, is this word even allowed on our website and how that might impact us? I think the whiplash of suddenly the government funding being frozen, and then, no, just kidding, it's not no, now you need a different kind of criteria. You need to answer these questions, I think has really challenged nonprofits who have been really reliant on government funding to be able to do their work well. Some organizations receive, for example, like 2 years of commitment from a government agency to do the work that they're doing. Well, they were questioning because they weren't sure whether the work that they have already done would actually be reimbursed, because a lot of these government funding works in a reimbursement model. The nonprofit has to have the money first, and then do the work, and then seek reimbursement later. So the money is already gone, and suddenly they're being told, well, maybe you might not even get it anyway because your work might not be aligned with this federal administration's agenda. So then the question is, well, do we even bother doing the second year, even though we know that the community needs it and we need this funding as well?
And orgs have been out that money. There are orgs that were in that situation, and the check never came.
Right. And they have to write it off. Some orgs were in a fortunate position where they were able to, just put that aside. Most organizations won't be able to do that. I mean, we might talk about this later, but federal funding is one of the largest sources of income for nonprofit organizations. Individuals and foundations cannot meet and cover this cost that's been lost if things have been suddenly cut.
Yeah, well, and there was the year ago when we had this conversation, the new administration hadn't taken office yet, so we were doing a lot of what might happen, we don't know kind of a thing, and now we've had this year. And to what you were just talking about, there was this string of executive orders, there were these decisions on funding that in some cases were found to be illegal, right, because they were able to sue and litigate that. As we sit here today, and I know it's hard to contemplate it in a midst where there's also this happening here, specifically in Minnesota with all of the presence of federal agents, what from that trough of executive orders and just directives, especially early in 2025, what is having the most impactful tails right now, would you say, for nonprofits? And maybe you just alluded to it in your last answer, but those haven't gone away necessarily.
No, right. Honestly, I think one of the biggest surprises was around how quickly people turn against the nonprofit sector as a whole. And perhaps it started in Minnesota with, there are organizations and individuals and honestly for-profit entities that have committed fraud using federal funds. But to vilify an entire sector is, I don't know how else to put it. It's just, I think it's wrong. But that has been the narrative that we've been trying to fight, not just in Minnesota, but across the country. It doesn't surprise me that I think a lot of nonprofits are feeling very fragile right now, whether that's to retain the staff that they need or to know where their next sources of income are going to come from so that they can pay their staff. To a point that, I'm talking to some executive directors of smaller organizations, they're like, I have decided to forego my own salary so I can pay my staff. Those are the kind of decisions that leaders are having to make. And keep in mind, nonprofit organizations, nonprofit, the term nonprofit is simply a tax status, not a business model. As executive directors or as CEOs, we are not the owners of nonprofits, right? Any profit that we might make gets reinvested back into the organization. So this idea, nonprofits are, stealing taxpayer money or whatever these awful narratives are, it has really harmed the entire sector and really harmed the public trust that we really need in order for us to be able to focus on our missions.
With this uncertainty, just maybe reflect here, Amy, on some of the things we've done here at the Minneapolis Foundation and philanthropy that you've seen in general. There's been a lot, maybe when we chatted a year ago, that we didn't even know we were going to do, I would say, in some ways. So just maybe even just kind of run through a list if you can recall some of the things that have happened in the last. I can't even remember everything that's happened in the last year.
Well, I think the foundation has really stepped into the moment by listening first to what community needs are, responding with funding, and then sharing all of that learning and listening to our fund holders so that they can also respond and fund. So some of the things that we've done are the One Minneapolis Fund, which is our kind of nimbly responsive fund. And so last year that was dedicated to organizations in that public media space that had experienced significant federal funding cuts. Last year, we updated our economic mobility grant rounds to offer nonprofits capacity building grants because we know that they're responding to a really challenging sort of landscape. Most recently, we announced our grantees for our new Building Forward Fund, which was $1 million infused to organizations in the community that are working on big, bold solutions and pivots in this time. And so that is something where I'd encourage our fund holders to take a look at, right? What are those organizations that were funded through those different grant rounds that we have, because those are all organizations doing really important work in the community and have been vetted through our grant process. Of course, then we take all those learnings and hold events like today, right? Just learning opportunities for our fund holders to engage, to get closer to community, to better understand what's happening in community. Last year we held a pop-up giving circle specifically on immigration, collectively bringing people together to learn, collectively pooling dollars, and then collaboratively deciding where to grant those dollars out to community. And so that is another thing that we'll hold this year. Again, another pop-up giving circle specifically on immigration. So I encourage folks to continue to take a look at all of those learning and engagement events that we have, because that is the way that in part we're responding again with our listening, our learning, and then sharing that learning with fund holders who also want to step up and respond.
And we have had the ability also to put out more money. I think
Yes.
we've set a record, and I think you might have the number there too. Like it's like both the grants that we give with our discretionary dollars, but what our fund holders have given as well.
Yes, so it is exciting that in our fiscal year that we're currently in, with 2.5 months left, more than $155 million has gone out into community from the foundation and from our fund holders. It's an amazing outpouring of generosity, but I think what's even more amazing is that all of the stories that make up that $155 million, right? There's stories of nonprofits who are being so resilient and who are pivoting in this moment. Stories of our donors who are walking alongside of them, right? We're really proud of that $155 million because that is stepping up and responding to community need. And we're proud of the stories that become possible because of the generosity of our fund holders. It's a record-breaking, never before in our history. And if there were ever a time, certainly now is it.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because I think a lot of times when donors are giving, I think, no, here's what I would say. Nonprofits in particular, especially if they do fundraising, I think feel the need to reach out to every single donor, thank them for their donation. And that type of work takes time to store donors and to make them feel seen and appreciated. So I think on behalf of all nonprofits, I just want to say that please know that your donations are being appreciated and is really needed right now. Just because you don't necessarily get an immediate thank you may not necessarily mean that that it's not being appreciated and being used in a really good way. And so for Minneapolis Foundation, for you to be able to share that with your fund donors, I think is really important. So I just want to say that.
That's a great note. Then, constant communication as we can. We do have a question from our audience, and there is a spot on this webinar where you can submit your own question, and we definitely invite you to do that. This is actually goes to another event we did this year, but have you seen anecdotally, 10,000 feet level, whether these conditions have created more need or conversation or actual mergers, acquisitions, even organization sunsetting? What have you just observed in the last year?
Yeah, no, I think anytime that there's a crisis, there is always a chatter about this mass closure of all these nonprofits. Now, a couple things. One is that, the last time these kind of crises happened, the federal government actually did step in and provided, federal relief dollars that were really helpful and for us to be able to retain staff and make sure that we kept our doors open. So it's a little bit of during COVID. Sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah. So, that has certainly shifted, and that money has dried up. I apologize, Tom. I just totally lost my train of thought. What was the question exactly?
No, it's just about the in the past year, mergers, acquisitions,
right.
And even sunsetting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that is always a normal question that folks have around shouldn't there's too many nonprofits. Shouldn't they all be working together? honestly, this is what I learned from you all. Like, you all had this like whole like a strategic sunsetting event, and one thing that's really important to know is that it's a really intentional effort to both either close your doors or to merge and find the right organization that you can potentially work with. And it is a process that should not be just done during times of crisis. It should be something that's been thought out, and a lot of times it takes like 5 to 10 years, right? So I think that that's really one thing that's really important to note. Second thing is, like, we didn't necessarily see a huge surge in the number of organizations that might have sunsetted. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It certainly has. Upstream Arts, for example, had to recently close their doors. But one of the things that we are seeing are more nonprofit organizations sunsetting programs or making decisions around, having to let go of staff. So there are decisions that may not be as flashy or newsworthy necessarily, but there are also very, very difficult conversations and decisions that leaders are making that may not necessarily be public. I also think that because of the fact that if your resources are small and there's all these things happening, organizations are having to like narrow their focus. So I think in a lot of ways, nonprofits are very nimble, especially if they're small, local, and understand what the community needs are. And in a lot of ways, we want to be able to see them be nimble in whatever it is, whatever the needs of the moment might be. But you can't necessarily do that if you don't have resources. So I think, even if a rural organization that is working has a food shelf, but also support, raising backpacks for children, and they also help, drive people to their medical appointments. Well, they can't do all of that anymore. So now they're going to have to figure out what is the most impactful program that they can do, which sounds like a smart business idea, except for the fact that there's no one else doing the other work that they have decided to cut. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and from that event, Amy, as well, it's this, if there is a moment, if there is the flashy moment of we have to go out of business or merge, or to do what you're talking about, where you drop one of these programs, sometimes people feel like, well, they're closing. They're good, I don't need to give them any more money, but that's something we've been trying to communicate as well.
Right, to step into those moments and support during those different sort of things. I think one of the ways I frame it with the donors that I work with is give with understanding, meaning that, hold all of the things that Nonoko is sharing about the nonprofit sector with us. Hold that in your giving. Recognize that you're going to hear about leaders leaving or budget deficits or potential, closures or combining of programs. In this moment, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad business practices. It is indicative of the challenges of the sector. And so exactly that, it's not a reason to turn away from giving, it's a reason to continue to support that organization through that. But that giving with understanding is really important, and recognizing that so many more nonprofit leaders are saying, I didn't know we were going to have to do this, right? When I built my budget 6, 9, 10 months ago, I didn't know that we would have to respond to a government shutdown of SNAP benefits. I didn't know that, this sort of immediate need literally on our streets today would be happening. And so recognizing that giving with understanding and then giving with flexibility and predictability is also important for our fund holders to hold. And again, flexibility meaning general operating, and predictability meaning that if there's organizations that you know and love and support year after year, make that a multi-year commitment to that organization that you name and tell that organization so that they can kind of plan accordingly and a really volatile sort of funding system.
How do you think about this, Nonoko, as you have conversations with nonprofits? Because there's always a push, especially from boards, and this is rightly so, to think strategically. Where do we want to, skate where the puck's going to be, kind of a thing. Where do we want to be? But then right now, especially this moment, it seems to be full-on crisis mode at this moment. It really seems to be just get through today, right? How have you thought, as a leader, about how you marry those two? It just doesn't seem, this is just me, from the galleys here, saying it doesn't seem like today is the best day for a nonprofit to be having a big retreat about strategic thinking if they're trying to get through the day and help these 10 people. But maybe I'm wrong. How do you think about those two dynamics inside any nonprofit?
I mean, I think one thing I would ask is, is this the same kind of expectation that we might have for, let's say, for-profit companies who are also both like doing, the risk, for example, investment bankers that, invest in 10 different companies. If 2 of them succeed, well, like that's a plus for them, except in our case, like, well, if you're not, if you like close or if you, that's a terrible business decision. Like that's a failure of the organization. The thing is, like, it's a yes and it's always been a yes and. We need to have had the strong infrastructure and the foundation in place before the crisis happens, in order for us to be able to meet whatever it is the next crisis. This isn't going to be the only one, right? And we have seen that over and over, like there's going to be another next crisis. I think when there is a much more visible crisis that's happening and when funders really want to fund this work, there's a huge surge of donations that go out into specific types of organizations. That's great, don't stop that. And we also need that funding during whatever the normal is these days, but normal times, so that those are the moments, to your point, when they are planning and strategizing and trying to figure out what is it that we need to have in place in order for us to meet the next, issues in the moment. Conversely, I also think nonprofits are also suddenly reeling from like, wait, I needed to have all these things, compliance and policies and risk analysis, that they were just like, it's not something that we could do before. And they're finding themselves in a situation where there's much more added scrutiny, both from the state and federal level, against nonprofits. And so that means, like, are you registered with the AG's office, which is the one thing that we are recommending. That's not just the one thing, but one big thing that we are recommending right now for any organizations that are fundraising, to make sure that they are registered and compliant with the AG's office, Minnesota AG's office, Attorney General's office. But like, I think, in a lot of ways, like nonprofits, when they were so under-resourced to begin with, well, they're focused on like what's needed at hand, and they might have forgotten that they might need to have a document retention policy. Right now, there's a lot of attacks around like cybersecurity, for example. Like, what organization is thinking about cybersecurity at this moment? But right now is the time that they need to be thinking about it, especially if you have client names, like information about clients. We're hearing reports that some organizations are getting subpoenaed. Like, these are things that are actually happening on the ground right now. So I think it's both in terms of like, how are we supporting organization when things are a little bit calmer, so that they're ready for these moments when we really need them the most.
In addition to charitable donations, Amy, how are we talking to organizations and especially with fundholders, on how individuals, yes, donate, yes, charitable donations, but what else? What other actions are there?
Yeah, it's kind of that time, talent, treasure, right? Certainly in this moment, being active in advocacy is an important thing, where they're shifting policies, and never underestimate the power of your voice in moments like this. So either walking alongside of a nonprofit who's doing direct advocacy efforts, following like the foundation's policy and legislative agenda, or really connecting with, right, organizations like MCN, where they are having legislative alerts and really supporting the advocacy policy efforts of the sector as a whole. So advocacy is important. And then volunteering right now, time, right? We've had so many stories of our fund holders who, right, stepped up and stepped into that food shelf space or bought food. I think that volunteering right now is really important. And right, hearing some of the things that Nonoko's sharing of what nonprofits are really holding, I think folks who have expertise in scenario planning or risk planning, risk analysis, those are areas of expertise that I think most nonprofits can be welcoming and support and help in. So I encourage folks to ask ask the nonprofits that they know and love, what is your need outside of funding in this moment, and how can I partner along with you in that?
And then also, like, I assume a lot of these fund holders, your fund holders, are also joining boards or part of boards of nonprofits, which is, of course, a form of volunteering. I think it's really important more than ever for board members to be really educated about what is actually happening, issues that's impacting the areas of the work that their nonprofits are going through, how to best support their staff leadership right now. And a lot of times, like, I think there's a misunderstanding about like what boards' roles are on nonprofit boards. It's not to tell the leadership who you hired for their expertise and tell them what to do. But it is around like, how do we best support them in this moment in time, talking to them, making sure that they feel supported by the board in terms of decisions that they have to make. But they also need to understand their fiduciary responsibilities, which isn't just simply about donating money, but understanding the laws and governance of what is going to keep nonprofits as compliant and compliant as possible.
Yeah, we have one of the questions from online here is when you're thinking when there is an organization that needs to rethink or refocus its efforts, what happens if they actually still have some money left over that was initially given for something else that maybe they have to drop? Like it was allocated for this, but now the organization is doing this. Is there an easy answer to this, or a process that those nonprofits have to go through with that funding?
Well, okay, so a couple of ways to answer this. One is like I have thought about like overhead, this myth of an overhead. Nonprofits are businesses. We need space. We need people who are able to supervise. We need financial software and expertise in order for us to be able to run the business. These are considered overhead, but in our line of work, we call this core program support. It might not be like, well, I want to only fund backpacks that are being distributed to children in need,
right,
but I don't want to fund the people who are actually distributing those backpacks, right? It happens all the time. There's this misconception that if you have low overhead, then that means you're much more efficient as an organization. That could be so, except for the fact that smaller or newer nonprofit organization, when they're starting to develop, they're going to have higher overhead. So it doesn't mean that they're less efficient. It's just that they don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place yet in order for them to meet, this like arbitrary number. Secondly, I think, we're going to go back again to unrestricted funding. If you provide unrestricted funding, then the nonprofits can determine what to do with that excess dollars that they are not necessarily using. And maybe that's the money that they can use towards the van that they have to hire to get food out the door, to be able to provide a wellness fund to their employees so that they can just like take a break and go enjoy themselves for a day, whatever it is, whatever the organization think that they need, they can use it for that funding. Otherwise, a lot of times when funding are restricted, nonprofits are required to send that money back sometimes to the funder. Like that might be part of the stipulation in the contract that we're signing. It was amazing to me. We had to do this once. I won't name who, but like even as an MCN, like we had maybe $500 left that we didn't end up using for this one program that we had. And we reached out to the donor thinking like
they'll just say
it's
just
okay. $500, right? No. They were just like, nope. So it took us more time, I think, to determine and then write a check, send it back to them for $500, excess that we had. So like there are stories like that pretty often. So again, if there is money left over and you still feel like it was important to provide restrictive funding, if the nonprofit organization reaches us and say, what can we do with this funding? Please just give it to them. I think that's what I would say.
Have you felt like your and your team's conversation with fund holders are different maybe than they were a year ago? And what I mean by that is more of this intricate, like this is actually how nonprofits work. Have you found that is happening? Are fund holders more interested in this kind of stuff, or are you still getting kind of the general, I just want to help?
I think it's a both and. I think we have donors along that continuum. I think that when we're talking with our fund holders, we're talking about, right, again, giving with that understanding of everything that nonprofits are holding and unpacking that. Right, I think we're also talking about being partners, a trusting partner, recognizing in this moment that relationship between donor and nonprofit really is about partnership, and so being a trusting donor right now is really important. We talk about recognizing that in this moment, that relationship that you have is going to be more important than perfect polished metrics, because those metrics and those outcomes may not be as easily achieved in this state, in this sector, at this moment, than they were years ago. And so recognizing that being that trusting partner is really important. The conversations we have too are diving in around being a curious partner and one that withholds judgment, right? So the report noted that a third of nonprofits would be ending their fiscal year with a deficit. And so just being curious, why and how are you at that point, and how can I help? How can I support that deficit, that funding gap? Again, without judgment, right? Without penalty of removing funding, but truly being that curious partner and recognizing that there are going to be unexpected needs and funding gaps. And so inviting honesty about the deficits, about the staff burnout, about all of those things, and then still stepping up and giving in the moment because you're recognizing that it is a challenging moment. And then again, being that partner that adds to and not takes away. So I think those are the types of conversations that we're having more of, just recognizing the state of the sector and then how you as a donor can step up and into and support nonprofits' really important missions in a different sort of way than they maybe have in the past.
One thing to add to that around like data too, it's just around like metrics. I think in a lot of ways, we are rewarded or expected to be more successful if you are serving more people. I got that a lot in my last organization. We worked with low-income students, and my constant question I got from donors, well, how are you going to serve more students? Like that's what we want to see. We want to see growth. I think this is a really interesting moment for us to really challenge the idea of what makes a nonprofit successful, especially if they're direct service organizations. Like, why are we celebrating the fact that a domestic violence organization gets to serve more people who are experiencing domestic violence, rather than talking about what are the actual root causes that are, impacting the needs to begin with? Mm-hmm. And why aren't we celebrating those organizations that are actually serving less people who are experiencing these like very traumatic events? Same thing with like sunsetting organizations. For organizations are having to think about sunsetting, sometimes it's actually a good thing, right? Like I love this story, like this is a while ago, but before marriage equality was a thing, like an organization, when it became legal for same-sex marriage to be legal, there was an organization that sunsetted, and it was like a whole celebration because their whole purpose was to make sure that people had the freedom to be able to marry who they love. And like that to me is like such a heartwarming story, because like people think like, oh, they just closed, that's just really bad. It doesn't have to be. In fact, like this is I think a unique sector, in that many of us are working towards a world where we don't have to exist.
And I hear that line, right? Yeah. I'm so and so, and I'm the head of this organization, and my job is to put us out of business, sure, right? Like, yeah. And it almost feels like a throwaway line.
Yeah, it does.
Right, but what you're actually talking about is to lean into it. It's great to hear when you're at the gala or the fundraiser, I want to put us out of business, and you clap for it. So don't turn around then and say, well, why aren't you serving more
right.
people? Is what you just said there.
Right. Exactly right.
You mentioned earlier that most the biggest part of the pie chart of where nonprofits get their funding from is federal
yes.
grants. I'm going to put you on the spot here, but state of Minnesota, is that number two? Do you know, or is it, it's in the pie somewhere, but it's nowhere near what the federal would be, right?
No, and I wish I had my data folks, and if anybody has any particular questions, please direct them to me, and I have the right folks to be able to answer that specific question. But when we were tracking the federal dollars coming in, and there was a huge chance that federal dollars, especially going into Minnesota, might be cut, we did do some research just around like how much of that dollars are actually going through the state to the state. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of complicated because federal dollars don't necessarily it's not easy way to count how much dollars are actually going into nonprofits, because there's federal dollars can be going directly to our nonprofit organizations and providing support. It could also be going through the state and then through a different agency, which then gets reallocated into either a nonprofit organization or maybe a for-profit company that they're contracting with. Then there's also this whole like reimbursement piece as well with like Medicaid and Medicare. So those are also dollars that's coming from the federal government. So it's a yes, and certainly like Minnesota has its own budget line, and that is part of it. But the federal government's support, the financial support that they're giving out to community, is much larger than what any of us can give.
Which goes to philanthropy. Yep. No one other sector can fill that gap.
Exactly right.
When those cuts are made.
Yeah.
What resources? Another online question. What resources do nonprofits have to address their own people's self-care, mental health, needs for therapy and whatever else they need.
Yeah,
I think I know the answer to this, but
kind of.
I'll pose it to you.
Yeah. I think obviously like self-care is such a personal thing. So I think that's one thing to note. And there's interest in a lot of nonprofit organizations like, well, we need to go and do an escape room together. I'll tell you one thing, like I do not like escape rooms. I will not be forcing that to my staff. Some people love karaoke. I like karaoke, but some of my staff members may not. So there's just like some sort of like flexibility there. What I would say though is like, I think the environment and how we're talking about self-care has really shifted over the years, especially since I've been in the sector. I think maybe it's our generational thing, but like early on in my career, we were just expected to put your head down. So what if you're getting paid little? So what if you don't have benefits? Mm-hmm. Just do the work because this is really important.
The mission.
And the karma, right? The karma will help pay the bills. I don't know what that is. But now I think maybe perhaps it is a generational shift where talking about mental health challenges and then being able to articulate what our needs are is a lot more prevalent in the nonprofit sector. And so to that end, I think that there are foundations and entities that are trying to provide these types of like self-care, either that's money or even like having discussions around sabbaticals for nonprofit people. Those are a lot more, in my opinion, like a lot more prevalent. It's not as talked about as much as I would like to see, but I think it's continuing to grow. I would mention Nexus Community Partners, for example, did this really amazing funding for leaders of color who have been disproportionately impacted by a lot of the things that's been going on in the past 6 years. And so, they were really thoughtful about their community and what their community needs are. So they were able to like meet some of the people, but the funding wasn't enough to cover everybody who applied. I think there was like 1,000 individuals who applied, and they were chosen by lottery, and only like 20 was able to be supported, or something along those lines. So there's certainly a need out there.
How does a philanthropic advisor like yourself, Amy, and the foundation think through and talk specifically to fund holders who, sometimes when you are in a position to open a DAF, it's because maybe you sold a business and suddenly you have money, and you actually didn't grow up with a lot of money, and so maybe you were just used to giving $100 a month to the animal shelter or something like this. How do you reposition people who suddenly do have some means to think differently about how they give and how they invest in these organizations?
Yeah, that speaks to a lot of different tools that we have at the foundation to help uncover a giving plan, to help uncover what are your values that you want your giving to be guided by. And I think it also speaks to just the general work that we do through philanthropic advising. So your last two questions about both federal funding cuts and philanthropy not being able to fill in all of those needs, and then this continual need for the kind of the mental health care and of staff wellness. Those are the sorts of needs that we're continually connecting our fund holders to, right? So that we can understand where they want to give, how they want to give, and then connect them into viable things that can really live out their values in action. We're continually doing that sort of matchmaking or connecting. Examples in the last year, right? Last year, the Advocate for Human Rights had a matching grant for unaccompanied minors who needed legal representation. So that was a point of connection that as we're building those relationships with our fund holders, understanding what their interests are, and then helping get them connected into community.
To make them even aware. So it's
Yes.
it's folks on your team reaching out to them saying, hey, did you even know this existed? There's this match out there in the world.
I often say I am not a fundraiser. Been there, done that, and there are beautiful people who do that. I am a connector now. I am a connector between, our philanthropic advising team is a connector between community needs that we're aware of, and then thinking through the relationships that we've built with our fund holders, what we know that they're interested in, and simply making that connection. The stories of that really are countless of how we're helping people give advised. Oftentimes it may be a new organization or a new initiative, but it may be something as simple as a call that I made late last month that said, hey, you haven't given the last couple years to this particular organization, but they are going through a challenging time right now. They have a matching grant. It might be a great opportunity for you to revitalize your support there. So again, not a fundraiser, but just a connector of more deeply understanding what those community needs are.
And did they give?
They did. Yes, they did. And that's like the exciting part of doing that philanthropic advising work, is making those connections in the way that helps more dollars get out the door, and then again, importantly, more stories of great impact in our community.
Well, and as we're going to bring it to a close here, I mean, I think it's been a good conversation, but I just want to, first of all, kind of open mic. What else do people need to know? I mean, you knew you were coming here today, and it's a different world than when we first planned this event here in Minnesota, but just big picture, what else do people need to know as we set forth on the rest of our day?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. A couple things. One is that no one likes fraud, and no one is condoning fraud. I think, especially from a Minnesota Council's nonprofit standpoint, we want to find a solution where nonprofits that can access funding can get the funding that they need, and also have the right level of regulations and oversight that would hopefully be able to prevent. You can't prevent fraud. It's going to happen regardless. But we can do our best to try to meet that. But I think vilifying an entire sector due to the fact that there was one organization that did something absolutely terrible, that doesn't mean that we're not condoning it. But I do think the gut reaction is like, well, we need to do more oversight then. And I think I want the public to understand that we are highly regulated, we are highly transparent and accountable as a sector. And so, our hope is that as any decisions are being made about how to regulate nonprofits, that the nonprofit sector is involved in that decision making. So a couple other things too is that some of the things that are under attack beyond all the things that we talked about are also our tax exempt status and our nonpartisanship. Nonpartisanship is right now being protected by an amendment called the Johnson Amendment, and that is absolutely in danger of being repealed. Like right now, nonprofits, especially C3 organizations, can't endorse candidates, can't endorse specific bills, but that allows us to actually then meet the really needs of the moment, regardless of what's happening politically. We don't want to see, let's say, an organization that's providing, need within a community, and a community member doesn't want to go there because they don't necessarily align with the political values. These organizations are going to continue to meet the needs of people, regardless of what values they might hold. And there's also studies out there to say that once somebody learns about the fact that our sector has to abide by the nonpartisanship law, that there's more likelihood that these people are going to trust the nonprofit sector more. So we're going to be defending this as much as we can, and we would love the support and input of that.
This is a court case in Texas, by the way.
There is a court case in Texas, yes, specifically around houses of worship. Now that particular case is only about 2 different houses of worship, but we also understand there might be a cascade. Once that's yep, you can endorse a candidate from your pulpit, then how is the tax exempt status, I think, is also a challenge too, where this federal administration is specifically targeting organizations that might not align with their particular values. LGBTQA plus organizations that supports immigrants, organizations that are led by and serving culturally specific communities. These are all organizations that might be labeled suddenly as a domestic terrorist and suddenly have their tax exempt status stripped. We're very, very fortunate to have a really strong network at the national level, including the National Council of Nonprofits, thinking through lawsuits and making sure that we're pushing back against these harmful ideas that are coming out. At the same time, we also recognize the fact that it's a very real reality that might happen. And so I think for us, especially in a place like Minnesota, where we need to continue to think about how do we best protect nonprofits at the state level as well, and or also thinking about if is giving really just based off of the tax incentive, or is it really about the mission? Because sometimes, yes, you donate to a C3 organization and you get that tax exemption, which is great, and there are also C4 organizations, which are advocacy organizations. Or if somebody, like if an entity loses their tax exempt status, would you as a donor be willing to continue to support them because you believe in their mission? I think that those are all like really important conversations that's going to come this year.
Yeah. Amy?
Yeah, I would say it's important for our fund holders to remember that the funding environment right now that nonprofits are operating in is far more competitive, and that there are changes happening from corporate giving or private foundation giving. And so and the volatility in federal giving as well, of course, and federal funding. All of those changes are important to hold and recognize then that being an individual donor or a family donor is really a powerful thing in this moment. They're not bound by giving guidelines or giving timelines. They have freedom and autonomy to give, and to give significantly, and that's really powerful in this moment. I think when you hold all of that sort of changes in the funding environment that nonprofits are experiencing, it's also a good time for fund holders to recalibrate their own giving and to think about those giving amounts, recognizing that things like inflation and wage pressures and increased program demands, that means that funding that has stayed the same, that $500 grant that you may have given out year after year, is essentially flat, if not a cut in that nonprofits' budgets and what they're able to do. So I think recognizing the overarching funding environment that nonprofits are experiencing, and then recognizing that as a individual donor, it's a powerful opportunity to, again, get off your assets.
And I'll just throw out, obviously, if you are a fund holder and want to engage more, get in touch with your philanthropic advisor. If you've never had a donor advised fund, we can certainly answer those questions as well, so reach out. And maybe you have a donor advised fund, but it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in one of those commercial banks, and you're listening to this conversation and you don't feel the same level of engagement. Well, you can always bring it over.
Yeah.
Come on over.
We'll help you give advice.
That's right, we'll help you give advice. All right, final question. What gives you hope?
It's a really challenging, question to answer in this moment, obviously, for so many reasons. But regardless of what we're seeing in the news and what's happening on the ground, I think that they are real, and they hurt. But there's something to me around the collective grieving and collective empowerment, and communities really standing up and supporting each other. Just driving around and seeing parents in the corners of, schools, for example, watching out to make sure that parents aren't getting just swept up off the street. It is heartbreaking to see that, and also at the same time, like, they don't need to be standing in sub-degree weather, doing this work, but they do it because they care about their neighbors. This might be a little cliche because I work for the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, but Minnesota does give me hope. I think it's such a loving and caring environment, and it is not just in the Twin Cities, it is everywhere in all areas of Minnesota. I have met and talked to and learned from nonprofit leaders who really deeply care about their work, and not even just about the work, but how the work impacts their communities that they love so much. And I want to make sure that they're uplifted and they have what they need to be successful. So I'm really, really grateful to those individuals and these organizations that are keeping us sane in this moment in time.
What gives me hope is, at its core, is remembering that philanthropy is about people helping people, humans helping other humans. And I think at a time when there's so many dehumanizing things happening, that is the hope that I grasp onto, of that simple act of helping another person is so powerful right now, and it gives me hope, but it also gives me a sense of responsibility too.
Yeah. Amy Pfarr from the Minneapolis Foundation, Nonoko Sato from Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. This conversation will also exist on our YouTube channel, the Minneapolis Foundation YouTube channel, so share widely. If you missed it or you know someone who missed it, it will still be available. Thanks so much for joining us.